Hello, sir.
Hello, Ankit.
Sir, there is a PIL under the consideration of the Supreme Court, which is seeking a lifelong disqualification on MPs and MLAs convicted of criminal offences. Now, currently, the convicted politicians are banned from contesting for polls for 6 years after the jail term is over. So, before we get into the larger picture about criminalization of politics and why is there such a thing, let me ask you this fundamental question: is this a reasonable demand?
Now, first of all, Ankit, it's true that criminalization of politics is a matter of shame. Actually, we in the Lok Sabha movement are pioneers in that. Way back in 1999, we came up with a list of 42 contesting candidates of major parties in Andhra Pradesh at that time with a serious criminal record. There were no disclosure norms at that time. It happened subsequently. So we gathered evidence from thousands of fellow citizens, ensured the confidentiality of the source because otherwise they would have been in danger. We also gathered information from the media. We cross-checked. We established certain uniform, unassailable standards to decide who has a criminal record. Conviction is not enough. Charges framed and pending, then rowdy sheeter, history sheeter. And if there are multiple acquittals, even if there are acquittals, but if there are multiple of serious charges, again, that also we took into consideration. A very high-powered committee headed by a former Chief Justice of Allahabad High Court chaired it. Very eminent people participated. That sent shockwaves in the country. But what we must understand is criminalization is not the central problem of our politics. It's a soft underbelly of the system. It is a symptom.
Okay.
Obviously, we have to curb it. There's no question about it. And obviously, there has to be disqualification if people are convicted of serious offenses. But as a general rule, disqualification is not the best answer to overcome the democratic deficit.
Okay.
There is a democratic deficit in India. And it's very easy because we're angry with politicians.
Right.
And there's a good reason to be angry with politicians. And every country, every democratic country is angry with their politicians. And we much more so for a variety of reasons. There's corruption, there's criminalization, there's very poor quality of services, there is centralization. All kinds of things are happening. So we're angry. But lashing out at politicians and asking for radical solutions is not a solution. Because you see, every democratic country that became authoritarian, the route they have taken is massive disqualification. Pakistan.
Okay.
Whenever an authoritarian military regime wants to legitimize itself, they say a corruption or some other allegations, and therefore, so 2,000 people are disqualified. Right now, Imran Khan and his party, everybody was disqualified, and others. Now, I'm not going to merits and demerits of each individual. That's not our issue.
Okay.
But disqualification eventually leads to a slippery slope of decline in democracy and leads to authoritarianism. That doesn't solve the problem.
Okay.
Take Russia. Putin habitually uses disqualification as a means of eliminating opposition. Take a country like Belarus. So I can go on and on citing examples. So disqualification is a tool we have to deploy, but exceptionally, not as the norm. That's the reason why, remember, the 1951 law is the one that talked about disqualification of candidates with criminal record. These are the members of the Constituent Assembly, which converted itself into provisional parliament until 1952.
Right.
So these were the makers of our Constitution. What did they say in that? A, limited disqualification. And B, a very important thing we're forgetting. Section 11 of the Act says, the Election Commission may, for reasons recorded in writing, remove the disqualification or reduce the period of disqualification.
Right.
What is the idea? That you cannot allow disqualification to derail politics in the country. I'm not arguing for not disqualifying. I'm arguing for using it indiscriminately as a tool because we're angry. Take, for instance, the case of Mr. Rahul Gandhi. Now, he was convicted for an offense. A criminal case convicted him. First of all, rarely is there such a conviction for libel or whatever is the crime he's accused of. Because he made certain allegations against some people, damaging their reputation, etc. Typically, it's a civil case, not a criminal case. Say A, it's a criminal case. B, conviction is rare. And C, the maximum punishment allowable under law is imposed in this case. Now, again, not going into the merits and demerits of an individual party or a politician, if a major political leader in the country is disqualified on these grounds, democracy becomes very unstable. It delegitimizes democracy. So while it's tempting for us to be angry with politicians, disqualification must be a rare tool, though a necessary tool. But it does not really solve the problem. It creates many more complications if you're indiscriminate. Second, just because you disqualify an individual doesn't mean that you improve the nature of politics. Oftentimes what happens is the son or a daughter or a member of the family who does not have a criminal record replaces that person. Obviously, legally and technically, the son cannot be accused of the offenses of the father. But what we must recognize is that in most cases, the son has become the successor not because of any virtues, but because he happens to be the son of the father. And is elected because he is the son of the father. Take a recent case which attracted national attention. Brijbhushan Sharan.
Right, yes.
Now, I don't have any comment about the criminality or otherwise of that individual. But look at the facts. He is one of the few in India, maybe the only one I do not know, who was elected from 3 separate Lok Sabha constituencies for a total of 30 years and 6 terms. There are very few Indians who could manage to win 3 separate Lok Sabha constituencies. There were allegations of a certain kind against him. And the party in power, or his party, felt it was appropriate to replace him as a candidate. Who was the one who was replacing him? His own son. And at a time when BJP suffered severe losses in UP, the son won that constituency hands down.
Right.
I think Kaisarganj constituency. He was also elected earlier from Balrampur and Gonda, Mr. Brijbhushan. So, just because you no longer have a criminal or a person with allegations in the list of candidates, has the democracy improved? So, we require a deeper understanding of our democracy and the nature of the problems, and then find durable and effective solutions rather than knee-jerk kind of responses. Sometimes they may do more harm than good.
So you've been a champion of political reforms since we can remember. So, and we've talked about criminalization for politics every other day. There are discussions happening in certain cases in Supreme Court. It happens in public discourses also. But what is the root cause of this criminalization of our politics?
It's a great question. Criminalization is not the cause of a political decline.
Okay.
It is a symptom of a political decline. The reason why Lok Sabha movement and people like me focused on that some 30 years ago, not today, 1998, 99, around that time, is not because it's a central problem, but because the soft underbelly of the system to make people realize that there's something deeply wrong and we have to address these challenges. This is an easy way. And therefore, what are the root causes? I think 4 questions we have to ask of ourselves. The answers reveal the root causes and therefore the solutions. The first is the person whom you and I regard as a criminal. The courts revile as a criminal. Media, etc., we talk about them as criminals. Often they're regarded by the local people as heroes. Why? Because most of these criminals who rose to prominence in public life later are people who were settling disputes through rough and ready methods.
Okay.
Why was that necessary? Because our justice system has collapsed. There is no dispute resolution mechanism accessible and available and effective in this country. So in effect, these criminals are behaving like undeclared judges locally.
Okay.
Sanctified by social support. Now, in other words, there's a market demand for criminals in India. If you don't address the challenge of rule of law, administration of justice, accessible, easy, justice available to everybody, civil justice, let alone criminal justice, you will not eliminate criminals from our political or social life. The second issue, why do these criminals, who obviously have therefore, because of their work and profession, if you call it a profession, a network of people who follow them, a band of followers, muscle men, and so on and so forth. And 2, they made money, obviously. But why do they want to get into politics? Because the moment they come into politics, from Supreme Court to you and I, we all attack them, they become objects of public criticism, they are exposed. Why are they risking it? Because in our country, the crime investigation apparatus is controlled by the political executive in a large measure. Therefore, for a criminal who is facing real or potential charges, it makes sense to be able to control the policeman who is investigating the crimes against him. The man who is supposed to be investigating you, if he salutes you and take orders from you, what more do you want as a criminal?
Next best step.
Therefore, the natural evolution of a successful criminal with a good public image is politics. The third question, why are political parties embracing criminals? It's a very silly answer to say all politicians are corrupt, political parties are bad, therefore they are choosing criminals. It's absolute nonsense. They feel as sad as you and I do about the decline in politics. But given our electoral system and the political culture in our country, there are three determinants of power. If all else is equal, these three determine who is more likely to win, provided they belong to major political parties. The first is the money power. The second is the organization and the network that we have. Third is caste power, that you are seen to be a member of the dominant community or a significant community there. Now, look at the criminal who enters politics. He already has a network of people under his control, and he already acquired money. No criminal entered politics in India without a caste tag. He styled himself as a caste leader, oftentimes a local dominant caste leader. These are not small-time thugs, or these are not mafias. These are people who have become leaders of a caste in that area and treated as a hero by those castes. Therefore, they have the caste power. In a few cases, like in Mumbai, it's religion. So they always acquired a tag, caste or religion. So they have all the three qualities required to give them an edge in a first-past-the-post system in electoral politics. And if a party denies them an opportunity, chances are they'll be defeated. So parties are helpless, because parties in elections are fighting for victory.
Correct.
And ours is not a system where you lose a few votes, it doesn't matter. A few votes matters, everything. Because one vote more you win, one vote less you lose. So that is the third issue, electoral system and the party politics. The fourth one, why are people voting for them? There is a lot of empirical evidence to suggest that if all else is equal, a criminal with an image of Robin Hood, with an ability to force the system to deliver something, is more likely to be elected than what we believe are honorable politicians. Because our system has become very inflexible, wooden, unresponsive, apathetic. People are vexed with it. Power is highly centralized. Service delivery is terrible. So within these parameters, it's more likely that a person with rough and ready methods, putting some fear into the minds of the bureaucrats, is more likely to get some positive response to address the grievances of the public. And therefore people, they don't see them as villains, they see them as heroes. Partly for delivering justice, rough and ready justice, settlement of disputes, partly because they are making bureaucracy respond to some extent. Now, unless you address all these four challenges, essentially they come into three baskets. One is, how do you ensure rule of law and effective delivery of justice accessible to everybody so that there is no market demand for criminals in the society?
Right.
And along with that, how do you insulate crime investigation from political control and yet make it accountable? Independent but accountable. So the whole rubric of rule of law in a genuine sense and justice delivery. The second is electoral system and the political culture. And the third is effective local governments that deliver well and are accountable, and at the same time a bureaucratic apparatus that is under the local control, that's effective and accountable. Now, without addressing these fundamental challenges, we're looking at some symptoms here and there and lashing out, A, it's most unlikely to yield any positive results, and B, sometimes it could be extremely damaging and dangerous to democracy.
So two of the four things that you mentioned are about an ineffective rule of law and criminal investigation system. So do you think we as a country lack a majority for reform in these areas?
No. For economic growth, I always said there is no majority in the country because welfareism still rules given the poverty. And unless you have inclusive growth touching the lives of the majority of people, there will not be a majority in electoral sense for growth. But for rule of law, it was never made an issue.
Okay.
And people sort of, because remember, there was no rule of law before independence came. There was no rule of law before colonial rule. Therefore, it is not something that people understood that they could aspire to. Might is right is a norm in feudal societies or monarchical societies. And in a Castilian society with tremendous inequalities, obviously the birth, pedigree, influence, money, and access to political power, they all give you greater access to whatever you want rather than rights to everybody equally protected and freedoms available to everybody in equal measure. They're there on paper, but in reality they're not there. So people don't even realize that rule of law has to be an integral issue of politics because our political discourse in media or middle classes or political parties never centered around that. The average person who is contesting election, the notion is if I'm in power, then I can get anything done.
Correct.
The police under my control, I can get my fellow released, I can get the adversary jailed or a case filed against them. This is the normal expectation. So the Weberian norms of bureaucratic functioning or equality of treatment of everybody, they have still not been institutionalized in the country. And the political parties never really bothered to make it a central issue in our political discourse. So people would certainly want it because who doesn't want equality of treatment before law? But they don't even know that it's possible or that is a goal or any party is willing to deliver. So I don't think there is any opposition to that. There simply is no awareness of it adequately, and the political parties are quite happy because parties keep complaining against the party in power. Supposing if I'm in opposition, I complain about ruling party, abusing power and vengeance politics, selective persecution and prosecution, all these too. Not one party, not one leader is saying, I will bring about the following systemic changes to make it impossible for any government to apply law selectively. Are they saying that?
No.
They're only saying they're attacking us, sometimes explicitly, sometimes implicitly they're stating, once we come to power, we'll pay back in the same coin. That is our politics, not rule of law. Or because I'm jailed and therefore I become a martyr in India. If I'm jailed, I'm always a martyr. Even if I'm actually a criminal who deserves to be in jail, that's a different matter, thanks to freedom struggle legacy. Therefore, use that as a scar to get public support. But never a notion of rule of law seriously debated or communicated to the people.
And with regards to criminal investigations, sir, it sounds to me like a vicious cycle. The criminal takes advantage of the criminal investigation system and then becomes a politician and does the same thing. So how do you break that vicious cycle?
Oh, see, you have three elements here: the judiciary, the police, and the elected government.
Okay.
You also have prosecution. But police and prosecution, we can put them in one basket. Now, you have to have give and take. You cannot have Puritan structure because, for instance, if you take away the control over law and order, public order, no elected government will accept it. Similarly, while I am generally opposed to judicial overreach, this is one area where I think judiciary must be given a pride of place in both controlling prosecution and controlling crime investigation and holding the crime investigation branch into account. Not as judges, sitting judges, but members of judiciary must be deputed. We have already a tradition of many states embracing district judges, serving district judges appointed as law secretaries. So this is not unusual. The judiciary becomes a part of the executive branch of government in select situations is not unknown. And supposing they had prosecution, for each district there is a district prosecutor drawn from judiciary. Supposing there is a committee to hold the crime investigation agency of the police to account, and entirely they and they alone control their functioning administratively and legally, and headed by the judiciary, bring judges. It's perfectly legitimate. So you have to give some, you have to take some. Police get autonomy in crime investigation, but police become accountable. An autonomous police without accountability is a disaster. While we want independent crime investigation, if that independent crime investigation is not accountable, if there are no checks and balances, that's the most dangerous thing. A rogue policeman is a disaster. There are many societies where a police chief is feared more than the president of the country or prime minister of the country. I remember I monitored the elections in Maldives long ago, some 20 years ago. The police chief is a feared functionary there, not the head of the government. So let's not have any illusions. No, a very eminent jurist, Justice Venkatachalaya, long ago when I was arguing for autonomy to the crime investigative agencies very fiercely, he calmly said, "You're absolutely right, but remember, we live in a system of compensatory errors. The distortions of the system indulged in by one branch or one segment of government are sometimes neutralized by the distortions of another segment. So if you want to take away any kind of political voice in crime investigation, you guarantee that the police crime investigation force is fully accountable and transparent. Otherwise, it may be even more dangerous than the current situation. So you have to have give and take. For instance, many police officers, and even Prakash Singh case, the Supreme Court, in my judgment, has erred by saying that all police, you simply appoint a DGP and give autonomy.
Right.
It doesn't work like that. No government in the world has given up control of public order. It cannot. It's essentially as much a political function as a legal function. You do not deal with crowd control, let us say in Kumbh Mela and in a student agitation and a farmers' protest and a communal riot in the same manner. Each situation requires a fine political judgment, not only a legal understanding of the issues. And no government, no responsible government can give up that control, because then all hell may break loose. But crime investigation is a different thing. If you believe that justice must be utterly independent, you cannot adjudicate on partisan basis. Now, crime investigation is nothing but collection of evidence to facilitate justice. How can that be partisan then?
Correct.
Similarly, prosecution. India's prosecution is the weakest in the world, probably. It's ridiculously weak in every sense of the term. You have to give them the pride of place in overall coordinating and directing investigation and, of course, in prosecution. So you have to have a careful design. And several committees looked at these things. Malamat committee did a grand job of looking at criminal justice system. Soli Sorabji committee looked at the Police Act. The various police commissions looked at various aspects. Administrative Reforms Commission, second Administrative Reforms Commission, of which I was a member, actually we produced a detailed report. And I personally monitored the design of that particular structure. We gave a roadmap, a pragmatic roadmap as to how to reform the police, prosecution procedures, and judiciary. So, if you really care and if you delve deep and think carefully, there are answers.
Right.
But there is no instant, easy, quick fix.
Right. So, this challenge of criminalization of politics, are there other major democracies that face the same issue, or are we unique in this aspect?
I cannot answer definitively because I have not studied adequately. It's a good question. Maybe I think it's a good idea to gather more and more evidence. But it's but natural that if you don't have rule of law, if you have, for a variety of reasons, defective democracy, that criminalization and political power, they come together is not surprising.
Right.
I would be vastly surprised if it's not the case. But I cannot offhand answer definitively unless we do some deeper study.
Right. So you've also talked about electoral reforms quite a bit. And in your writings, you've advocated for some form of a PR-based model. So in a PR-based model, what happens to this aspect? Like, is it solved or tackled in a PR model?
Nothing solves anything permanently or fully. But in a substantial measure, the incentives are altered.
Okay.
The reason why political parties embrace criminals is not because they love them, but because they bring value in a first-past-the-post system, where a few more votes means victory, you go past the post. A few less votes means defeat. All the work you have done, votes you have gathered are wasted, quote unquote.
Correct.
In such a situation, a locally influential don has outsized power. He cannot be denied an opportunity. What is the PR? In PR, the incentive for the parties to maximize the overall vote percentage by creating a mood favorable to them across a larger territory like a whole state or the country. Therefore, if they want to gain favor of a few dons locally, the danger is they will lose the larger electorate across the whole territory.
Right.
It's not worthwhile. Losing a few votes here or there doesn't matter at all. Getting overall larger share of the vote by the image of the candidates and by the quality of the agenda and the credibility of the leadership is much more important than finding strong men who somehow deliver locally. The whole incentive is altered. And therefore, of necessity, the parties will be forced to look for people with clean image, with a competent image, and a spirit of public service to enhance their appeal to electorate. To that extent, criminalization will significantly come down. But as I said, unless you do the other things also,
Correct.
the rule of law and effective delivery and local governance, in some form or other, if not in politics, in some other form, the influence of criminals will be still there. But definitely, a well-designed PR system helps. PR system has its own problems. No electoral system is a panacea. Every country is unhappy with its own electoral system. America, with the separation of powers, every day they keep complaining about the paralysis of federal government. Right now, Trump is saying, I got a mandate, now Supreme Court is stopping everything I do, or some Congress doesn't allow me to do whatever I want to do, even if I got the mandate from the people. This is a complaint in America all the time. You go to Britain, people complain about the first past the post system and its distortions and outcomes. You go to PR countries, they have their own complaints. So there's no perfect answer. We have to find an answer to suit our conditions in our context.
Right.
In that context, the shortest and easiest way to improve the political conduct and political outcomes is PR system, but with certain caveats. Inherently, proportional representation will create fractured verdict.
Right.
Because no party is likely to get 50%. But if you notice, rarely does a party get 50% vote in the country, particularly in the country of our diversity. But Indian people want stability. And therefore, you have to figure out the mechanism. For instance, supposing 85% of the seats are divided on the basis of proportion of votes. You have 15% seats which are bonus seats that go to the largest party.
Okay.
Then the instability part is overcome. The other problem is political fragmentation. Today, unless a party has 25, 30, 40% vote in a whole state, the party is not viable. That's why even major parties like, Congress, which held such dominant role in Delhi and in the country. What happened in the Delhi election recently? Or BJP in a state like, let's say, Tamil Nadu or Kerala? Or Congress now in Andhra Pradesh? So even major parties with outsized influence and credibility and stature and image and so on and so forth, they become irrelevant in the first past the post system unless they are the top two players.
Correct.
But in proportionality, you go to the other extreme. In self-interest aggregation, if each caste becomes a political party, gets a small number of votes and therefore gets 1 or 2 MLAs, India is further fragmented. I don't think anybody wants it. Therefore, how do you prevent that? Again, there's an answer. We can decide on a reasonable threshold. Unless a party gets X percentage of vote, you can name it 5%, 10%, 15%. I'm talking of a state. Nationally, 5%, only 2 parties get.
Correct.
But within a state, it's up to the political system to decide what is the consensus. Now, that threshold, even if you become a casteist party, is very difficult to cross. A 10%, 15% vote is not easy. A 10% vote is not easy. Experience teaches us. So, there are problems with every system, but you have elegant answers.
Right.
If you find consensus, if you really focus on what to do. Right now, what's happening is, we're all enmeshed in the existing rules of the game and playing within the framework and becoming victims of the vicious cycle. We're going with the flow. Nobody is looking at really sensible answers. And because we are conditioned by the English-speaking countries, Anglo-Saxon experience, we are not able to go beyond. The vast majority of countries in the world, democratic countries in the world, have proportional representation. First past the post system is a legacy of the British colonialism. Only where Britain ruled do you have first past the post. Even there, New Zealand gave it up. It has proportional. Australia gave it up. It has what is called alternative voting system. Only Canada has it. Even in Britain, the regional parliaments of Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland They don't have first past the post. They have proportionality model of
Right.
various kinds. When they had European elections before Brexit, they had proportionality model. London mayor is elected by direct election. So even Britain, except for the House of Commons, they are giving up. Indians and the Canadians are the last Englishmen, politically speaking. So we must expand our horizon. Look at what's happening in the world. What is the best practice suitable to our conditions? Adapt it to our needs. There's no perfect solution, as I repeat. But if we come to a consensus on this, if major parties realize there's everything to gain for them and for the country, then this is the easiest thing to happen, because within the constitution the provisions exist. Many people are surprised. You can actually bring in proportionality model without any change of the constitution, just by a simple change of law.
Right.
The constitution never talked about first past the post system. This was brought to my attention by Sri L.K. Advani. Until that time I didn't realize it. The first two general elections, 1952 and 57, we had multi-member constituencies for reservations. That was given up for odd reasons. So that was facilitated because the constitution provided space for multi-member constituencies. So there's no problem. When I showed it to Sri Pranab Mukherjee when he was president, he was stunned that the constitution makers had so much of foresight. So it's the easiest way, technically and politically, if only there's a consensus.
So answers exist. We need to think about it. And
Absolutely.
one of the last things that you mentioned, sir, is that people vote because all else being equal, they would vote naturally for a person who would be able to get more things done.
Absolutely.
And that is somehow overlaps the criminality of that candidate. So do you think it is fair to blame the people, the voters?
No, that could be very silly.
Okay.
The people of India did not agitate saying we want democracy and universal franchise. It's our visionary leaders who said we will give ourselves democracy and universal franchise. India is the first republic in the history of the world which gave unto people across caste, class, education, gender, religion, rural-urban divide, universal franchise from day one. Now, it is for the same leaders, a succession of leaders, to build a system to enable the people to understand the link between the vote and the consequences that affect them. We created a centralized system where democracy is largely limited to freedom to shout and exercise of franchise in a robust manner. We are most noisy in our elections, no other country. The amount of fierce political competition and the noise is they're remarkable. But beyond that, democracy has not been allowed to percolate. It is our failure as a governing system rather than the people.
Okay.
For instance, high degree of centralization. In centralized systems, you don't understand what is the benefit that you're getting from the vote. You vaguely exercise the vote out of anger, emotion, whatever, but you don't see the link between the vote and consequences. So each time you're disappointed, come next election, therefore the political party or the candidate has enticed you to vote for him. Therefore, in a poor country, money becomes the currency. In many states, distribution of money has become the norm. Now, everybody is distributing money. Major political parties that have a stake in power, they're all distributing. We all know there's no secrecy. In many states, I'm not saying everywhere, Kerala is an exception. Perhaps Gujarat is to some extent, at least it used to be an exception earlier. I don't know what is the situation now. Other southern states are terrible. Many other states are following the same thing. Northeast and Jammu and Kashmir, money is playing an outsized role in elections. After money, the short-term welfare. What some people loosely call freebies, individual short-term welfare at the cost of the core functions of government. Now, increasingly, look at the elections, election after election, including Delhi recently, Maharashtra, Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, or other states. Everywhere, how many free things you offer short-term welfare rather than the state's core functions, infrastructure, rule of law, quality of education, quality of health care, basic amenities like water supply, sewerage, and so on and so forth, and traffic maintenance. All those things are secondary in electoral calculus. It's not an accident. Because people don't see the link between taxes and services, they don't understand how the government is impacting their lives. This is something they understand. Money in hand, and post-election, I guarantee money comes to my Jan Dhan account through Aadhaar, etc. That people understood. And third is caste. In a caste-ridden society, there were divides. These are the three determinants of political outcomes. Now, you cannot say because society is bad or because people are inadequate, democracy is not functioning, is ridiculous. It is our duty as a governing class, those in power, those out of power, those with some influence. Each of us must take responsibility. I have no position of power, but I take responsibility as a citizen. If I have some voice, some understanding, it's my duty to work for it together with others. So it is abdication of responsibility. It's victim blaming, basically.
Right.
Because who are the people who suffer from misgovernance? It is the poorest of the poor, the illiterate people, the mass of the voters. How can you blame the victims for our follies, for our failure to build a system that delivers to them? Each election they vote with great gusto, with great hope and faith that things will change. They're asking for that change. The elites are not delivering the change, so don't blame the people.
Right.
It's a disastrous response.
Thank you for sharing your perspectives with us.